Welcome to Kingdomize, the podcast, where we discuss how to see our lives and our world through a kingdom lens, how to infuse kingdom culture into our families, our workplaces, and our cities, as we all participate in the dream of Jesus to see his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So welcome back to Kingdomize, the podcast. We are breaking a record. It's going to be so fantastic. I have two, not one, but two Ians with me today. This will be a great day. We are in our Solutionaries series. As you know, we are finding people all over the globe that are not just reading the Bible and not just learning about Jesus, which is good, but they're actually bringing the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven in different spheres. And today we have with us Ian Harry, and he's got a great story that we're going to hear in just a minute. And so thank you for tuning in to Kingdomize, the podcast. Ian Green, you have so many great friends. Ian,
I do.
Amazing. And Ian Harry, this is what I know about you, Ian, is that you're a general manager of a software company called Smart Software. You're involved in business. You're involved in education as a chair of the board there. You have 4 children, your husband of one wife, as far as I understand in the document here. But I am going to read this. I'm going to read this directly because I love this, how you self-describe as a butler in God's strategic war room, connecting with some of God's generals in the faith and walking with them. And I can't wait to poke into that because that sounds like a lot of fun. That sounds amazing. And Ian Green has told me tons of stories about this. So this is going to be a great time together. So Ian and Ian, welcome to Kingdomize. Welcome to the Solutionary series. Ian Green, what do you want to say as we go into this?
Look, I'm really happy to have my friend Ian with us today. We probably go back, probably 13, 14, 15 years probably now. Met him through a mutual friend, Lucas McIntyre, which that'll come into our conversation somewhere today for sure. But absolutely delighted. Ian is the real deal. He is unpretentious, but incredibly strategic in the kingdom of God and how he lives his life naturally, supernaturally. And that's the kind of language you've used for many times. I want to put flesh on those words today. As you listen to Ian's stories, it's just absolutely incredible. So, Ian, it would be great just for you to give us a little bit of a background, how you've arrived today, where you came from. If you could do that, that would be great.
Yep, great, no problem. As said, I've known you for a number of years, and I've had a journey that really started with God when I was 8 years old. Actually, I had an encounter with God when I was coming back from a holiday with my family. I was in the back seat, and God started showing me some really underprivileged people and some poor people and people that were struggling in life. I was born in a very conservative Christian home where loving parents. So the contrast for me was really significant. And I remember sitting in that car and God touching my heart and saying to me, what do you want to do about this? And so I said to him, I want to be a missionary, but I don't want to be a missionary, with no money. I don't want to go to another country and do something, but I do want to be a missionary. I want to take what I have and give it to others and to serve others. And so what happened was, that was when I was 8 years old. I attended a church, a denominational church. I attended that for the next 10 or 12 years. And then I did have an encounter when I was at a youth camp, and everyone was going to church on a Sunday morning, and there was something in me that just couldn't go there. I just couldn't play church anymore. And I'd been going to youth for a long time and all that sort of stuff. And so instead of going up the hill to the community hall for the chapel service on the Sunday morning, I walked down to the lake, and I literally held onto a tree in a little mini storm, and I just wept for 2 or 3 hours. I just had an encounter with God where I surrendered, and that was the beginning of something. And I learned something about myself, I suppose, is that, I'm not just prepared to, follow the crowd. I'm prepared to take my own journey if that is required. And I suppose that sums up a lot of where I've been. I went to Bible college in '86. I met my wife Kayleen around that time, and we were married in '89. We'd been involved in C3 Church for a long time. We moved from the denominational across to what was then Christian City Church, and Pastor Phil and Chris really encouraged us to step up into faith and to understand what it is to serve God in your local church. So we have a great grounding, and we're still serving God in our local church now after 40 years. But there was a time there where I said to Kayleen one night, I can't do this anymore. I don't have a church inside of me. There's got to be more to life than just going to church and behaving a certain way. And so I went to a church conference the next day, and I met Fergus McIntyre just in the lunch line. And I said to this man, I'll serve you. Let's just work out how I can best serve you. I don't want to play church anymore. I just want to serve people who are out there working with God. And this man was an amazing guy. I didn't know much about him. He was a prophet. He was prophetic. And at that time, I really did, as I said, I needed someone to take me to a new place in God. And, it was an interesting story, but, a couple of years prior to that, I really wanted a mentor. And the Lord gave me a vision one night when I was at a Connect group. Power of God was flowing and everybody's out in the Spirit. And I was just standing there, and the next minute I saw this vision of a tractor coming back, and Jesus was on the back of the tractor. And he said to me, you've been waiting for a mentor, and he's not coming, but you have to come away with me. And so I'm a pretty practical sort of guy. I said to myself, how am I going to do that? How is it going to look differently than me just turning up to church? And I had a young family, and I lived at one end of the peninsula, and I thought, okay, I'm going to take a day off every month, and I'm going to go up to the other end of the peninsula, take my Bible, take a soccer ball, take a pair of swimmers, take a pen and paper, and walk up to the other side of this peninsula. So I took a bus all the way up there. At the beginning of every month, I would take out a piece of paper, and I'd write a mind map of who I was and what I was doing and all of that sort of stuff. And I would crunch it up and put it in the bin as I walked onto the boat to take me across the other side of to this little picnic area. And so I did that probably for a year and a half. I took a day's annual leave every month. What I realized was I was going over there not as a father, not as a husband, not as a friend, not as a manager, not as a businessman, but I was just going over there to find and encounter God, just as a son encounters his father in heaven. And so, I had some amazing times over there. I wrote prose, I read the Bible, I preached, I held on to trees, you name it. I was doing some amazing things in that time. But I learned how to practice the presence of God, right, myself. So then when Fergus came along, it really was the opportunity for God to shape me. Like I had a passion, my passion was there, my energy was there. But like all of us, we need to be shaped by God. And God was so gracious to me. He shaped, the next 25 years as I served Fergus, and, Ian knows that I did with Fergus.
Let me give you a little bit of background to Fergus, Ian, because he just passed last year. Remarkable. I mean, one of the true prophets. I mean, people talk about prophets. He was absolutely a 100% prophet in every sense of the word. I remember him being with our staff at Next Love International. It was just a remarkable 3 hours. God pouring over everybody. It was just absolutely incredible. And for decades, he worked within the C3 movement as their itinerant prophet. And so churches would have him in for 3, 4, 5 days, and it would revolutionize the place. The level of anointing that he was carrying and the level of revelation that he had was absolutely remarkable. And so Ian connecting with him, he can tell the rest of the story.
So I struck up a deal with Fergus, and my deal with Fergus was, what you do corporately with churches, I will do your business administration and serve you if you will teach me how to do that with Christian business guys and Christian men around the world. And so we embarked on this 25-year journey. We only finished last year, but it was an interesting start. He wanted me to go over there and, run conferences and all of that sort of stuff. And I said, look, that's not really who I am. What I'm doing now, I'll tell you what I'm doing now, Fergus. What I'm doing now is I'm taking an individual relationship with a man, and I'm saying to him, and I did this thing called Day in the Life of. And what I would do is I would book in a time with a businessman, and I would spend the whole day with them at their workplace. And so what I would do is that I would just sit in the corner. So if you were an architect or something, Brian, I would sit in the corner of your office, and you'd be doing all your drawings, you'd be taking your meetings, and I'd be literally just sitting there. I might have a coffee with you at 10 o'clock. I'd have some lunch with you at 12. But more or less, I've just observed you the whole day. And then the next day, I would go out into the bush. I'd take my laptop and I'd just spend 2 or 3 hours praying for you, and then I'd write some prophetic word to you. And so what I said to Fergus was, what I will do is I can do that when I come over and do some work in Eastern Europe with you if you want me to do that. And so anyway, the long and short of the story was, I started to do that. And one of the guys who I met through that process was my friend Aleš Vela in the Czech Republic. And through that friendship, it was an opportunity for me to practice doing exactly what I wanted, Fergus to teach me and how to do all of this. And so, yeah, the long and the short of that was it's been an amazing journey. We ended up supporting a young pastor starting a C3 church in his town. I started to work with a series of business guys, and I would go over to Czech every 6 months and literally go around. And that's how I learned how to do a lot of the prophetic sort of work that I'd watched Fergus do. And so I was just able, because I had that grounding in my own quiet time with God, I learned how to practice that. And so, I've moved to a point where, instead of it, a lot of us, I think we start off and we go, that might be God, but it's probably me. Now I've shifted to, oh, that's probably God. It might be me, but it's probably God. And so I've shifted that thing a little bit. That has given me a level of confidence. And so that there was a real time there where I learnt the craft of what working the prophetic was, right? But one thing is really, as Ian said, Fergus was an amazing prophet. There's no doubt about it. He was very accurate. But what I realized through walking with him and having that connection with him was that it doesn't really matter how wonderful the gift is if what God's saying doesn't land inside the person and doesn't land on the subject. So you can be the best prophet in the world, and you can have the best message, but if you can't put that into the heart and the minds of the people that you're befriending, it's not going to be effective. And so sometimes what I've felt is that if I can mix my ability to connect with people and the prophetic together, it will land and it will have a different impact on the world. And so a lot of my stories aren't necessarily, I'm in the boardroom and then God shows me, an oil rig that I have to go and buy, or a lotto ticket that I have to. That's not what I call the prophetic. What I would call the prophetic is that, when I commit to being connected with people, it's amazing what actually happens. And one was, an example where it may not actually be you as the centerpiece of what's going on, and it mightn't even be the person that is the recipient of that connection to the impact. One example we had was when we were in the Qantas Club. I had a commitment to another man, and I said, look, I really want to honor our commitment in our relationship. I'm busy, but you live in Brisbane, I live in Sydney, I'm coming up. Would you be prepared to come to the club, the airline club, for 45 minutes, and we can just meet? So we were in the club there. And so what happened was we just started talking. We just started talking about our relationship with Jesus. We talked about our marriages. We talked about the enemy's plans for us and the way that he's trying to thwart us. We talked about the times of intimacy with God, and we were sharing that over the coffee at the Qantas Club. And the next moment, I realized that it was time to go, and the plane got called. So I went up, and we were just packing up on our way to the thing. And there was a gentleman next door to us who was reading a book. And he said, guys, excuse me, before you go, I just thought I would let you know that I really stopped reading this book about 45 minutes ago. And I said, so what does that mean? He says, well, I've just been captivated by what you've been saying. and something's stirring on the inside of me because of this. Anyway, I didn't have time to talk about it, and to do that. So we went to the gate, and then I said to the guy, I said, look, could you go back and talk to this man and find his story? So he went back to find the story, and little did we know that he was a CEO of a mining company. He just come down from the other part of the state, and he'd come to he'd had a breakdown, and he'd had 3 appointments with psychologists to support him during that day. And it was 4:30 in the afternoon, and he told us that he hadn't been successful, that those trips to the psychologist weren't enough to do anything for him that day. But he did mention that because of our conversation, something tripped on the inside of him, and he was satisfied that he found something. So this is an example of where the prophetic nature of who we are and what we're doing is not just impacting what we would call the recipient in that connection, but something can happen outside of that domain. And I've had a number of those instances, but it comes back from serving people and being connected to them. And I have this practice of going into the local hairdresser shop and getting the broom and just cleaning the hair every time I go into the shopping centre. Not when I go and get a haircut, but every time I go into the shopping centre. So for 10 years, I just go into the back, and some of the staff don't even know who I am, right? So I just go in and pick up the broom, and I go and clean up the thing, and then I put the broom back, and then I walk out. So I've been doing this for 5 years, and one of the staff members, I was getting my haircut that day, and one of the staff members said to me, "You're the guy that comes in and does the broom sweeping." Anyway, the long and the short of it, I just got to get to know him, and then the Lord started speaking to me about his marriage. So I asked him a few questions about his marriage, and I realized that his marriage was in trouble. And so we then befriended each other, and then we would start to see each other outside of the haircut. So I would just help him with his world. And then that carries on, and I get to the point where, I said, well, why don't you come back to my place one night when I went up to see him? I said, look, my family's out, but, come upstairs. I'll make you some soup. Well, it was a winter's night. And so I just started talking to him about who I was and what I did and all this sort of stuff. And he said, hey, stop. I said, he said, I just really need to tell you this dream that I had. And the dream was that, that he was getting out of a car in that same shopping center. And he was getting out of the car, and he saw another car, a black car. And he has a Muslim boss. And in this dream, the Muslim boss and him were getting out of the car, and he saw another car, a black car. And he said, his Muslim boss in the dream said to him, the guy that gets out of that car, that black car, will be the one who leads you to righteousness. And you got out of the car. And that, and we struck up a friendship. I took him to a worship night. He admitted some of the challenges he was having in his marriage. And yeah, he basically said, yeah, I'm a sinner. I need to be saved, at this process. And so it's little things like that. It's you carry something as a son of God. You carry this connection with Jesus, and you have this ability to extend it and to reach other people. But it's most of my prophetic, or what they would call prophetic stuff, is literally based out of a solid connection. So you can share and really lead people into that, and it can happen anywhere. And honestly, it can happen anywhere. It's
so Ian, it's gone. You finish off.
No. What I'm saying, it literally can happen anywhere. I'm at church, right? And there's a guy that sits behind me, and I know him only through acquaintance. And the Lord said to me, hey, you need to get to know this guy. So the easiest way for me to get to know him was for the Lord to show me a vision about where he was in life. So I came up to him and I said, hey, can I share what I just saw in worship? And I just shared with him, and the tears came out of his eyes. He said, nobody knows this. This is where I'm going in my professional life, and we can't talk about it here, but in subsequent weeks, we've unfolded all of that package. But what I'm saying there is that, the prophetic is something to build connection, right? It's really important to be uplifting people. There's lots of examples of that. Sorry.
No. I mean, I'd like you to talk a little bit about your Saturday morning up. Well, it's not a mountain, but I don't know what you call it. You're in the bush, praying with a bunch of guys. How did that happen? Why did that happen? What's been the outcome of that happening?
Yeah. So just before COVID, I really had this sense of I wanted to do something ecumenically around with men. I didn't want to do it out of my local church because I was connecting with a lot of people, and the kingdom of God has spread not just in our church, but it was all over the place in Sydney, in my world. And so I thought to myself, I don't really want to do this out of my church. I don't want this to be a normal connect group. So I went to a minister friend of mine. I said, can I have the key to your chapel so I can just have a bunch of guys doing this and coming around? So those guys would come around on a Saturday morning, 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, and we would meet there. It wasn't a connect group. I didn't want anything to do with looking after people or anything like that. I was busy, but I really wanted to pray with them, right? I just wanted to pray. So we start at 9, start at 8 and finish at 9. And people all around Sydney coming to it. Then we hit COVID, and we had to go online. But we kept praying. We just kept praying, 8 till 9. And people would come on and off, and they would do whatever. And then what happened was I would start talking to people about it. And because it was online, people in Brisbane could do it. People in Philippines could do it. The guy in the US could do it. And we sort of like going, well, what's going on here? And then, so we prayed. We prayed for probably 3 or 4 years, just every weekend. And that's what we would do. And the power of God would hit people when they're sitting down praying, and people would be on the floor, and, people would share. So we learned how to pray over this medium, right? And then what happened was Fergus passed away. And I had this feeling when someone loses a general in the army, this is an opportunity for someone to change strategic direction. And I felt that when the kingdom of God lost Fergus on earth, there was going to be a shift in the way that men relate to each other and all of this. And so we would have this 3 years of solid prayer as a background. But then we morphed into, instead of praying in that, we started to talk prophetically. We started to validate our own walks with God. And we had, I had people who were coming in, and they still are ex-ministers, people that have been burnt out in the kingdom, people who once knew Jesus and walked away. So we've had some amazing things happen, and I took them away for a weekend, and I'm driving home, and we had 5 meetings. We had some prophetic stuff. We had some great times of fellowship across the group. And I'm driving home, and I said to the Lord, I said, that was incredible, amazing weekend. And he said, you know that you never opened the Bible once, and you never had, someone sort of do the traditional Christian men's sort of meeting. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. But yet, 2 people got completely set free of their past and all this sort of stuff. 8 guys got prophetic words that literally changed their whole life. I got emails and texts back from everybody saying, wow, that you've just resuscitated and done something in God. And so, I think there's an opportunity to take the new that God's doing and really, make an impact in the lives of especially men. I do a lot of work with men, and I just really love the ability for us to just connect with people and use the prophetic and use the passion that we have for God to connect each other together. And I've seen people just literally get their engines turned on, and people call me the engine starter, right? They literally, I've got a T-shirt. A guy actually made me a T-shirt, and you have this. You've got something on you to start people's engines. And I share this example where I went down to a country town. One of our boys was in a gymnastics competition, and Kayleen, it was a Sunday morning, and we were having breakfast in an Airbnb, or a bed and breakfast, what people would say, a bed and breakfast. And Kayleen's going, oh, where are we going to church today? I said, darling, we're not going to go to church today. We're going to be the church today. And she said, well, what does that mean? So I said, well, let's just see what happens. And so what happened was I walked into the dining room, and we had to sit with somebody, and in that situation, sometimes you share tables and all this stuff. So I started talking. We just had small talk for about 20 minutes. And everybody else was talking and I wasn't saying too much. And then the guy says, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Oh, this is what I do. I'm working software, I'm an accountant, and blah, 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 blah." And he says, "No, but what other stuff do you do?" I said, "Oh, well, I've got a passion for, flying around the world and talking to men about their faith." If someone says, "So what does that look like?" And I said, "Oh, well, it's like turning somebody's engine on the inside." And this guy said, "Yeah, I know that's true." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I know when you first walked into this room, the engine on the inside of me was turned on." He says, "You don't know this, but 9 years ago, I left the church. And last week, I went to church for the first time in 9 years. And I left the church building last week. And I said, 'Father, I'm never coming back until someone turns my engine on.'" And so for the last 5 years, I have been calling this guy every couple of weeks. And we literally have developed a friendship. And I've got a truck driver down on the other side of the country where I just call him and we fellowship together. And in one sense, that's his church, right? He's out in the middle of nowhere and he's struggling with finding the connection. But there's an example of just being the church and being prepared to connect with people. And he said to me, he said, "But you're a business guy, you're in the city." And I said, "Oh, I've got a mobile phone just like you have." Yeah, we can build something as we go about and do that stuff.
Fantastic, Ian. Look, I want to just change gears now because your prophetic obviously works very naturally, supernaturally in those environments. But I know you've been involved with the C3 school at Oxford Falls for maybe 20 plus years, but the last 2 or 3 years, or maybe a couple of years, you become the chairman of the board. I mean, it would be good to know that's a different environment, right? A completely different environment and different application to the prophetic. So I'm interested to know how that works for you in that environment.
Yep. So it's involved the taking on the role. I used to be the finance director. I used to be the first administrator 35 years ago of the school. I became a director 15 years ago. My kids have gone there. My wife works there. So I have an involvement with the school. But the school was, I would say, potentially drifting from the traditional sort of Christian beliefs, just like a lot of educational institutions had the potential to do that. And I really felt that, we needed to get back to basics and follow God's ways and that sort of stuff. God asked me to, "Are you serious about this?" And this is about 3-4 years ago. And I said, "Yes, I'm serious about it." And he said, "Well, you need to go down and pray." And so I go down and pray in the mornings. And then I started praying. The chairman put up her hand and said, "Look, it's time to go." And so I was just praying for the next chairman. I was ready to leave after 15 years. My kids had finished school and I'm just moving on. And so I'm praying for this new transition and a new chairman. And I just got the shock of my life when the old chairman came up and said, "We've unanimously decided that, you're the guy to take over. And would you do that?" And so God had prepared me because I have a mindset that, when you're responsible for something, there's primarily 3 things that you need to do. You need to secure the boundaries. You need to rebuke evil. You need to be the gatekeeper of what comes in and what goes out and all that sort of stuff. You need to be prepared to clean up mess that's inside of your territory and understanding, because that's the world we live in. It's not all perfect and there's things that mess. And then, there's impacts of, whether it's the world or whether it's self-destruction internally, things get broken, right? So there's 3 things that I need to do. I need to rebuke evil and get rid of fear, especially in the education department, and then, fix what's broken and clean up the mess. And so God gave me a pretty simple task to do when I started at the school in that role. Yeah, I've worked with the board, I've worked with others to really identify the areas where we are getting smashed by the world and we are, succumbing to doing things our own way instead of maybe God's way. And so God started speaking to me about, looking at, we were just coming up to our 40th year. And the idea was that, I was to look for 40 years backwards and find the gold that was there. And my job was to, with the board, to gather the 40 years of gold and bring it back to the Lord and put it on the altar. And then he was going to reshape the next 40. So we've gone through this whole process called a 40 plus 40. And so we evaluated the 40, did our own, mission, culture, vision thing again. And then we embarked now on a slight shift, same vision, but slight shift in mission where, instead of just being a school, we're going to be seeing ourselves as a community enterprise that specializes in education. So the impact of the school is more significant than just, teaching, middle-class school children, academics and the ABCs, and then slotting a little bit of Jesus in the message. But what it's meant is that under my leadership, I've tried to shift the thinking from us not just, showing the message of Jesus on a billboard or on a cinema screen or something like that, but to really be like, if you use the analogy, it's not a theater it's not a cinema we go to where there's a predefined message of Jesus, but we go to a live stage show where we're all actively involved in it. We've all got an earpiece into the Holy Spirit, and he's helping us live our life in the ways of God and allowing the kingdom of God to happen. And so I think the shift that's happened for me is understanding that, for 2,000 years, the message of Christ is his message. And, it's probably his job to steward what that message looks like. But my job, and I use the analogy of, a flag, an X and Y axis of a flag, that's the message of Jesus. And it's not really my job to tinker with the message of Christ. My job to build out the the Z axis, right, to create some space for the kingdom of God to land on earth. And I suppose that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years, has been challenging and being prophetic in stepping out and declaring some stuff and seeing the Z axis being extended and having a place where people come and they're starting to feel God, they're starting to hear God, they're also starting to live out the ways of God. It's influencing the way we think parents should be relating to children. We want them a lot more engaged and involved in their education process. We're looking at early learning because of some of the challenges that we have as society. And, the early learning centers are just not working for us in our community. We're receiving children from those institutions that are coming in with serious mental health challenges, not able to be able to do, their shoelaces up because of the lack of connection that they have in those growing years, those initial years, because of the systemic way that we do stuff. And so we're challenging all of that. We're looking at things, and we're saying we're prepared to challenge that and look at different ways of doing things.
Not everybody was clapping, singing and shouting when you started bringing a kingdom paradigm into the school, which, obviously the roots of the school is absolutely buried in that. But for whatever reason, whether, the pressure from the education department or whatever, that began to erode a little. Not that it wasn't a Christian school, but some of the hard fundamental reasons why we have a Christian school, that was to create world changes.
Yep.
Some of that had been eroded. But as you started to bring, everybody wasn't excited about that, were they?
No. I've had a few challenges where people thought I'd overreach, right? Because I'm not an educator, for example. And so I struggled a little bit in getting the attention of people because, the world will tell you how to educate children, right? But the challenge is we just didn't have it. The system, we just don't have the system right. The system is flawed because we think the responsibility of educating children is up to the government. The responsibility of educating children falls with the parents and the families. And so we are working through inch by inch to change mindsets. And it's starting to flow through, right? People are seeing results. They're realizing that I'm not just here banging a drum for no reason. We do have some challenges with situations, But we also have the opportunity to transform lives with the power of God. And that is what we are going to do, right? And we have to model that right from the top at a board level. I'm going into meetings later today. And, I think people know the right thing to do, but in God, it's about timing as well, right? It's not just about the right thing to do, right? It's about, when has God said yes? When does God say no? We'll try to work it all out ourselves, right? And the great thing about it is, because I don't know anything about education, I just go, man, I don't know that. But one thing I do know is see that guy there? He's in the wrong job. He said, how do you know that? I said, well, 18 months ago, I was reading a book on the veranda, my front veranda, and I was meditating on some challenges that we have. And God clearly spoke to me. He said, see this guy? He's in the wrong job. It's taken me 18 months to get that thing through. But today I'm going to make some decisions based with the board's endorsement to bring that person into the right position in the company. So that's an example of being prepared to seek God and hear from him about what's going on. Right? Even selecting the new principal.
Oh, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, that's hot and that's new, and I don't know how much of that you can share.
Well, I can share a little bit. I was perplexed when I got midway through this process, and I'm walking through the school as I pray in the mornings, and I said to the Lord, so how do I know that the right person? How are we going to know that? And the Lord clearly said to me, that person is going to show you and tell you that they've heard from God about your plans. And I went, are you kidding me? How is that going to work? And anyway, I've gone through the process, and we've had numerous meetings about this, that, and the other stuff. And I was there at the beginning of this week, actually, and it was still an ongoing process. And one of the applicants actually rang the recruiter and said, I don't think I can continue with the application. And I thought, what's going on here? So I said, look, I'll ring the applicant. And I spoke to the applicant, and with fear of God in their hearts, they said, God started speaking to me about the plans that he has for that school and what you're to do and where you're to go and all of this sort of stuff. And it was quite amazing, because they just read my mail for the last 3 years. And so that's an example of us being prepared to not just do the norm, right? Just follow the bird seed and just do the norm, but to listen for God and to understand what he wants and make sure this school is purpose for God and to build the kingdom of God. Schools in our city, and they're probably right around the world, they're not just people. They're just not a place of education, right? They're a place for shaping community. They're like the megaphone for values and all of that. And people still trust schools. Parents trust schools. Families trust schools. And so we need to leverage that, right, as a believer. And we're looking at the nexus between the church over the road and the school. This is a powerful nexus that we can, if we're mutually submitted together, to be able to deliver that. So yeah.
Love that, mate. Love that. Brian, do you have any questions?
Oh, I have 1,000, and I'm out of time. I have 1,000. So let me put it this way. So, Ian, you may be the most unassuming prophet I've ever met in my life. And I love it. I love your mannerism. I love that you're just laid back. It's so good. As you're talking, and you're telling the story about yourself and Fergus, I'm thinking about this 33, where Moses would meet God in the tent of meeting, and Joshua was there, kind of sitting there. Like you talked about sitting there as things happen. And I see that rolling out, and the unassuming nature. What do you do, or how do you raise up other prophetic people? Like, you're just modeling it so well. Like, is there an intentionality in your life to go, who's the next Joshua that's going to come up, or how do I model this? Because clearly you're starting people's engines. You're a butler, you're a mechanic, all these analogies of your life. Is there something you're doing intentionally for the next generation of prophetic people?
I think I don't know whether it's intentional, but it does appear to be intentional when I ask people to come and join me. Say, for example, down at the school, for example, right?
Yeah.
There's a classic example of a man who's been involved in the school for a long time. And I said to him, he left the school last year. And I said to him, I think your time here is not up, but, let's go away for a little while. He came back, he texted me in April, and he said, look, are you still praying up there? I said, yes, I am. And so I walked with, I invited him in, and we went and we started to pray in the thing. What I did was I intentionally opened my heart up for him to feel comfortable talking about God the way I talk about God. And so as a result of that, over the last 15, 16 weeks, I've seen him drop his guard, right, about his relationship with God. I've seen him start to have dreams and prophetic words himself about when he reads scripture, he sees different things. So I think I just make myself available. I think what I've realized from Fergus was I was working for him and I served him pretty loyally, but he always gave me the time of day. He always gave me room to grow. He always left me hungry. And that's the thing that I intentionally do with the people that I walk with. I intentionally leave them so they come back next time. And I suppose that's where I try to serve others that way. And, I get a lot from other people as well. So like my world isn't, it's not just a one-way street here, right? I've got this worldview that, use the analogy of a jigsaw, and I'll finish on this. The jigsaw, it's got 1,000 pieces in it. And, my dysfunction and my sin and the world that I've lived and the trauma and the way I haven't handled things well, etc., it may disqualify me from seeing all 1,000 pieces. But the 15 pieces that I do see, I know them, right? Those other pieces may be distorted, they may be in the wrong spot and all that sort of stuff. But the 15 pieces that I do see, I know. What I've realized by connecting with Ian Green is that Ian also knows 10 pieces or 20 pieces or 50 pieces. Well, what I've realized is by walking with Ian, the 15 pieces that I have and the 50 pieces that he has now makes me 65 pieces of that 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, right?
A beautiful analogy.
And so that's the way I've viewed the world, with connection. And if I keep connecting with people, ultimately one day I'll get to see a jigsaw that's a little bit more than what I was done by myself. So that's it.
Yeah, really good. Ian, I know you'll love that because you're a big fan of the jigsaw analogy. We hear it all the time. And that's a great way to say it. I actually did expect something like that, Ian, because of your story being so relational. And that's amazing. That it's just, as Ian Green said several times today, that it's just naturally supernatural. And it's amazing. It's wonderful to see. It's wonderful to see it in, you talked about it in church and in business and the school. It's just living that out. I'm going back to the phrase you said, it's about providing space for God's kingdom to land on earth, which is amazing. Really, really good. Yeah. Guys, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Ian, Harry. Thank you so much for your time. Your story is so refreshing, so encouraging. So today, in the sense of how do we get people to just live this out in front of others in a natural way? So that's remarkable. So thank you for that. Ian Green, again, just amazing friends. You and your jigsaw puzzle, man. You could probably, between you and yourself and Ian, you probably have almost close to 1,000. So, hey, and thank you for listening today to Kingdomize, a podcast. I'm sure you picked something up that you need to probably go back and listen to again. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to say it's prophetic. I bet there's people that listen today that there was that ignition that happened in you. And if that happened, then get a hold of us, talk to us. It's the reason why we do our podcast, the reason why we do this Solutionaries series, is just real people living out their faith in Jesus in a real way. And we want that for you. That's all over the globe. People are doing that, and they're bringing the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And so we just want to bless you with that. And so thanks for listening today. Be back next week with another Solutionary on Kingdomize. Thanks for joining us today on Kingdomize, the podcast. Let's keep the discussion going throughout the week on our socials or on our website, kingdomizeglobal.com. Contact us today to see how we can walk together to see more of God's kingdom in your city as it is in heaven.